humans cling to pain?
Why do humans cling to pain?
We say we want happiness, peace, and comfort. Yet again and again we find ourselves pulled back toward sorrow, toward memories that hurt, relationships that wound, and choices that sabotage us. It almost seems as though suffering isn't just an accident of life, but something we secretly need. And no one explored this paradox more deeply than Fyodor Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist who stared into the abyss of the human soul and came back with truths that still haunt us today. To understand Dostoevsky's philosophy of suffering, we must begin with his life. Dostoevsky was not a man who wrote from a comfortable armchair. His words were carved from his own wounds. As a young man, he was arrested for joining a group of radical intellectuals. He was sentenced to death, lined up in front of a firing squad, blindfolded, waiting for the bullets. At the very last moment, a messenger arrived. His sentence was commuted to years in Siberian exile. Imagine that moment. One instant, you're preparing for death. The next, you're dragged back into life, but not into freedom. Into chains, into frost, into the endless emptiness of Siberia. For Dostoevsky, suffering was not a philosophical concept. It was his lived reality.
Man is sometimes in love with suffering.
So why did he later write that suffering is not only unavoidable, but perhaps necessary? In his novel Notes from Underground, his unnamed narrator spits out one of the most unsettling truths in literature. Man is sometimes extraordinarily, passionately in love with suffering. At first, this sounds insane. Why would we love what destroys us? Why would we embrace the very thing we spend our lives trying to escape? But Dostoevsky, with his eerie psychological insight, saw something we often overlook. Suffering is not just pain. It is also meaning. Comfort numbs us. A life of ease can make us shallow, drifting, unmoored. But suffering awakens us. It forces us to confront the raw edges of existence. When we hurt, we feel alive. We remember that life is not guaranteed, not permanent, not easy. Dostoevsky believed that suffering, paradoxically, brings us closer to truth, to the soul itself. In his own words, suffering is the sole origin of consciousness. That line may sound extreme, but think about it. Do we not grow most in times of trial? Do we not discover who we really are when everything is stripped away? Our deepest compassion, our capacity for empathy, our hunger for faith or philosophy. These are born not in pleasure but in pain. Consider a simple image. A man who has everything he wants: wealth, luxury, entertainment. His days pass in comfort. At first he is content, but slowly, restlessly, he begins to feel a void. Something is missing. Then tragedy strikes. Illness, betrayal, loss. Suddenly he suffers. And for the first time he is awake. His suffering cuts through the haze of comfort. He begins to ask, why am I alive? What is my purpose? For Dostoevsky, that was the paradox. Suffering hurts us, but it also humanizes us. So when Dostoevsky says we are in love with suffering, he does not mean we enjoy pain in the shallow sense. Rather, he means that suffering is tied to our search for depth, for identity, for meaning itself. It is through suffering that we touch the eternal. But there is more. Dostoevsky also believed that suffering reveals the darkest contradictions in human beings. Why do we sometimes sabotage our own happiness? Why do we choose the harder path even when the easier one lies open before us? That is where we will go next.
Suffering is the sole origin of consciousness.
Dostoevsky once wrote of a peculiar creature, the underground man. He is bitter, cynical, brilliant, yet utterly miserable. And in him, Dostoevsky gave us not only a character, but a mirror in which humanity's strangest and darkest tendency is revealed. The tendency to sabotage our own happiness. Why would we do such a thing? Why, when a clear path to comfort, wealth, or love lies before us, do we sometimes choose the opposite? Pain, loss, humiliation. The underground man explains it in haunting words. Man is sometimes extraordinarily, passionately in love with suffering. To him, suffering is not merely an accident of life, it is something we actively seek. In the modern world, reason tells us, seek pleasure, avoid pain. Progress, efficiency, comfort, these are the goals. But Dostoevsky saw through this. He saw that if humans lived like well-fed, well-managed animals, they would revolt against it. Why? Because man does not only crave bread. He craves freedom, even if that freedom destroys him. The underground man mocks the dream of a perfect society where everyone is safe, healthy, and happy. He says, shower him with every earthly blessing, yet he will play you some loathsome trick out of sheer ingratitude, simply to prove that he is a man and not a piano key. Here lies the essence of self-sabotage. We destroy our comfort to prove we are free. Think about it. Have you ever ruined an opportunity, not because you wanted to fail, but because failure felt more authentic than success? We stay in toxic relationships. We procrastinate until our dreams rot. We lash out at those who love us, not because we are stupid, but because deep down pain feels alive. Success feels mechanical, predictable. Pain feels real. The underground man thrives on humiliation. He tells us he is a sick man, a spiteful man, and yet there is pride in his self-loathing. In destroying himself, he asserts his freedom. To Dostoevsky, this was the human paradox. We secretly love to suffer because suffering proves we are not slaves to reason, not predictable machines, but free, unpredictable souls. Imagine a world without pain. Imagine every need met, every desire satisfied instantly. Would that not be paradise? Dostoevsky says no, it would be hell. Because in paradise there is no choice. There is no struggle. Without the possibility of suffering, freedom evaporates. This is why humanity, again and again, resists comfort. It is why revolutions destroy empires, why lovers walk away from stability, why artists starve rather than conform. It is why you sometimes hurt yourself even when you know better, because comfort kills the soul faster than suffering does.
Of course it is you.
Man is sometimes.
The Underground Man is not just a grotesque character in a Russian novel. He lives in all of us. In those moments when we delay happiness, when we chase impossible love, when we court disaster, we are him. This is Dostoevsky's warning. Man will always choose freedom over comfort, even if it destroys him. And in that strange choice, in that love of suffering, lies a terrifying truth. Suffering is not only something we endure, it is something we seek. Because through it, we prove we are free. Dostoevsky did not stop at exposing humanity's strange love for suffering. He also asked, what is the meaning of it?
I did it. I couldn't stop myself.
For him, suffering was not only a curse, it was a path toward truth, toward redemption, toward God. In his novels, characters are crushed under the weight of guilt, poverty, or humiliation, and yet it is through their suffering that they awaken. Think of Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. He murders an old woman, convinced that his genius places him above morality. But instead of freedom, he finds torment. His nights are haunted, his mind fractured. And only when he confesses, only when he accepts punishment and suffering, does he finally glimpse peace. To Dostoevsky, this was not accidental. It was essential. Without suffering, the soul sleeps. With suffering, it wakes. Dostoevsky himself knew suffering. Exile in Siberia, years in prison, poverty that left him begging publishers for advances, epileptic seizures that stole his breath and left him broken. And yet, he wrote, man is born for suffering. But through suffering, man achieves greatness. To him, suffering was not meaningless chaos. It was the cross every soul must carry, the crucible through which pride is burned away. This was the paradox. Suffering destroys, but in that destruction, it purifies.
He seems quite peculiar, doesn't he?
Indeed, so naive.
Look at Prince Mishkin in The Idiot. He is mocked, betrayed, treated as a fool. But in his humiliation, he embodies innocence and compassion. Look at Dmitri Karamazov in The Brothers Karamazov. Condemned for a crime he did not commit, he embraces his suffering as atonement. For Dostoevsky, humiliation was not the end. It was a doorway to grace. Through suffering, one becomes humble. Through humility, one becomes open to love. And through love, redemption shines. It sounds impossible, joy and suffering. But Dostoevsky insists it exists. He describes moments when the weight of pain breaks, and suddenly the soul feels light, free, even radiant. In The Brothers Karamazov, Father Zosima says, through suffering comes joy. And Dostoevsky himself, after epileptic seizures, would often write of moments of ecstatic clarity, as though pain had cleansed the doors of perception. This was his mystical vision. Suffering is not merely darkness. It can be a hidden light. Dostoevsky was not alone in this. Buddha said, life is suffering, but through suffering, one finds liberation. Christ said, "Take up your cross and follow me." Even modern psychology finds meaning in struggle. Speaking of post-traumatic growth, Dostoevsky's genius was to weave all this into stories of ordinary people. People who stumble, fail, suffer, and through their suffering, rise. He saw suffering as the furnace in which the soul becomes real, authentic, and capable of love. Without it, we are shallow. With it, we are transformed. In the end, Dostoevsky's lesson is both terrifying and beautiful. We suffer not only because we must, but because suffering is the path to redemption. The underground man may revel in pain for the sake of rebellion, but Dostoevsky points us beyond rebellion, toward transcendence, toward a suffering that does not end in despair, but in salvation. This is the hidden heartbeat of his novels, that even in the darkest night of the soul, suffering may become the seed of grace, and perhaps that is why, as strange as it seems, humanity secretly loves to suffer. Because within that pain, there lies the possibility of becoming more than we were. They say the 19th century belonged to Dostoevsky, but the 21st century still speaks his language. Because the truth he uncovered, that humans secretly love to suffer, has not vanished with time. It has only changed its mask. Today, suffering is not always chains in a prison camp or exile in Siberia. It hides in glowing screens, in endless scrolling, in the quiet emptiness of a life that looks perfect on Instagram, but feels hollow inside. We chase distraction, but what is distraction if not another way of running from our pain? And yet, paradoxically, feeding it. Dostoevsky would not be surprised. He once wrote that man is a mystery to himself, and that we are never satisfied even when all our needs are met. Modern psychology calls this the hedonic treadmill. The more we get, the more we want, and the more restless we become. Dostoevsky simply called it the ache of the soul. Think of the modern world. Why do we binge on Netflix shows until 3 a.m., even though we know we'll regret it in the morning? Why do we pick fights in relationships, stirring chaos where peace could have been? Why do some of us sabotage careers, friendships, even our own health, as though secretly craving the pain that follows? Because suffering makes us feel alive. Because without struggle we feel empty. Because, as Dostoevsky observed, humans cling to their wounds as though they are treasured.
I'm okay.
In Notes from Underground, the underground man laughs at the idea of rational progress. Give man paradise, he says, and he will break it apart just to prove he is free. Replace paradise with the modern consumer world, smartphones, food delivery, virtual reality, instant entertainment. And the warning is clear. Even if we get everything, we will still feel the itch of dissatisfaction. We will still find a way to suffer. Psychologists now confirm it. Self-sabotage, negative self-talk, cycles of anxiety and depression all reveal the strange comfort humans find in misery. Pain, at least, feels familiar, and the familiar feels safe. But Dostoevsky did not stop at diagnosis. He insisted that suffering could become transformative. In his novels, characters who endure pain with honesty Raskolnikov confessing his crime, Prince Mishkin enduring humiliation, Ivan wrestling with doubt, are the ones who glimpse truth. Suffering burns away illusions. It shatters pride. It forces a confrontation with the deepest self. And what about us? Modern people who drown in notifications, comparison, and the pressure to be happy all the time? Maybe Dostoevsky's relevance is sharper than ever, because he reminds us the goal is not to escape suffering, but to redeem it, to stop wallowing in misery for its own sake, and instead to turn it into fuel for growth, compassion, and meaning. Carl Jung, centuries later, echoed him. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To confront the darkness is to suffer, but to suffer consciously, that is to be reborn. So Dostoevsky still whispers to the modern heart, do not waste your pain. Do not cling to it for self-destruction, nor run from it into shallow pleasures. Instead, carry it, examine it, and let it carve you into something truer. Because in the end, the question is not, will we suffer? That is guaranteed. The question is, what will we do with our suffering? And in that choice, Dostoevsky believed, lies our salvation.